It arrived in 745.M41, the way a tumor arrives, silently, then everywhere. A border world first, one you've never heard sung of, because there was no one left to sing. Acolyte. Lean closer to the picked feed, you won't get a second showing. What you're about to witness happened in 11 minutes, and 11 minutes is all it ever takes. The listening post sat on the edge of a system nobody important had visited in 6 centuries, a rust-scabbed relay tower fed by an astropathic choir of 9, chained to their thrones with silver wire, singing the Emperor's light across the void, so the fleet 3 parsecs out would know the border still held. At 0347 hours, ship time, the 9th voice stopped. Not screamed. It just stopped, the way a candle stops when there's simply no more air left to burn. By 0349, the 8th had followed it. By 0356, the choir chamber held 9 bodies and no song, and the astropath senior, a woman named Voss, if you can trust what's left of the report, wrote 1 line before the Vox went to static, acolyte, and you should sit with it. The warp is leaving. Not silence as absence, acolyte, silence as retreat. Think on that. The immaterium's a howling ocean of hunger and dream, pressing against every world in the Imperium, every second of every day, and something had made it recoil, the way a tide pulls back hard and low, before the wave that drowns the shore. That's your first sign. Not fire. Not void contacts on the auger. You'll get a held breath, and another held breath, and then nothing at all, where a god used to lean against the walls of reality. You want to call it an invasion. It isn't an invasion. An invasion has a general, has terms, has a moment where someone might sue for peace and be heard. What came through that system afterward had none of that, because it wasn't an army, it was a single organism, the width of a continent, and you don't negotiate with a stomach. You don't send an envoy to a digestive tract and expect it to pause out of respect for your rank. The Tyranid swarm doesn't hate you. It doesn't know you exist as anything other than biomass awaiting conversion, and that indifference, acolyte, is so much worse than hatred could ever be. Hatred at least looks at you. So how does a species catalogue something built, cell by screaming cell, to defy being catalogued? How do you file a report on a god that eats gods, that has consumed things the Emperor himself has never named in any surviving text? Forget the hive mind, you don't start there. The fleet can wait too. Small is where you begin, with the thing crawling toward you across the rubble right now, low to the ground, all claws and appetite. From it, you work upward, 1 classification at a time, 7 levels deep, each rung driving you further into a horror that was never designed to be understood, only survived, and rarely even that. The archives don't start with a monster, acolyte. They start with a wound, and a man kneeling over it with a scalpel, asking why the flesh refuses to knit. Every ledger they filed said the same impossible thing. The tissue would not agree to be dead. Watch what happened above Terran Primaris, acolyte, and understand why the Ordo Xenos never sends poets. When the first battle barges burned atmosphere over that dying world, it sent biologist explorators instead, men and women who'd spent lifetimes learning to read flesh the way priests read scripture, and fed them into a slaughterhouse, still twitching with purpose. They pulled ichor from cooling carapace. Thoraxes screamed with a sound no human throat should make when peeled open, and inside, nervous tissue coiled in patterns that belonged to no single womb, no single world, no single sane biology. Ozone and rot in the same breath, that's the smell of something burning, even as it decays, because what they were cutting into had never truly stopped being alive, not in any way their instruments could certify dead. Catalog, dissect, repeat. They built ledgers thick with cross-reference tissue slides and battlefield autopsies. Somewhere in that mountain of wet parchment and preserved gland matter, a horrifying pattern crawled out from under the microscope, and it refused, acolyte, to go back in. You've been shown codex entries before, troop types, war gear, kill counts, the tidy bureaucratic taxonomy the Departamento Munitorum prefers, because bureaucracy is how the Imperium tells itself it still understands its enemies. Forget that structure now. What the biologist explorators built at Tyran wasn't a roster of soldiers. It was an autopsy of a single mind, wearing 11,000 different bodies at once. Every claw thing, and spore, and screaming void beast they dissected wasn't a unit. It was a finger, a nerve ending, a single cell, in an organism so vast that entire star systems amount to little more than its digestion. Do you understand what that means, acolyte? Truly understand it? It means when a termagant dies screaming in the mud of some forgotten agri-world, nothing's been lost that the greater thing even notices, any more than you'd mourn a shed skin cell. It means the biologist explorators weren't cataloguing a species. They were mapping an anatomy. And an anatomy has a shape. 7 layers of it, in fact. 7 degrees of separation between raw, disposable meat and the cold immensity that dreams it all into motion. At the bottom crawls biomass with barely enough nervous tissue to keep itself upright, existing for perhaps minutes before it's devoured, absorbed, forgotten, its only purpose to die usefully. Climb higher, and you'll find creatures that can choose, in some thin and borrowed sense, that can hunt, that can adapt a strategy mid-battle, and still every choice they make is a leash-length extension of a will that isn't their own. Higher still, and the leash grows longer, the intelligence sharper, the horror more personal, until you reach organisms that can plan, that can command, that can look something like a general looks at a battlefield. And at the summit, level 7, sits an intellect so absolute that entire star systems bend toward its hunger without a single word ever being spoken aloud. That is the shape you're about to be shown, acolyte. Not 7 kinds of monster, but 7 distances from a single, ravenous mind. And the closer to the bottom a thing crawls, the less it's permitted to be anything at all, except food that hasn't yet finished dying. Seeded ahead of the true invasion by the hundreds, sometimes the thousands, these drifting bombs settle over cities and airfields and prayer halls alike, and they detonate, not from malice but from proximity. A tripped Vox relay, a passing vehicle, a child's hand reaching toward something that looks, for one final second, almost beautiful. Infrastructure crumples. Voxcasters fall silent mid-sentence. And somewhere, in an administratum office 3 sectors away, a governor stares at a data slate and understands, too late, that the softening's already begun before a single warrior organism's touched the ground. What follows the silence is worse, because it's hungry. Ripper swarms move low and fast across the wreckage, a chittering carpet of small toothed things that no arsenal on the planet considers a serious threat, and it'd be right not to, because that's not why they exist. A ripper won't win you a battle. It was never built to. Ask yourself why the hive mind bothers breeding a creature this frail, this replaceable, and the answers are small and specific horror. Rippers are the mouths of the reclamation, the first stage of a digestive process that spans a continent. They swarm over the dead, your dead, their own dead, it makes no distinction, and they strip flesh and bone and gene stock down to nothing, feeding it back through bioacids and lower organisms toward the orbiting hive ships that'll, in time, remake that stolen matter into something new. Nothing's wasted here. Not 1 gram, not 1 strand of genetic code, not the marrow in a dead guardsman's femur. Every corpse on a Tyranid battlefield is a resource in transit, and the swarm doesn't mourn what it consumes, because consumption's the entire liturgy it was born to practice. Sit with that for a moment, acolyte, because it's the horror beneath the horror. These aren't soldiers you're studying. They're janitorial organisms, the least significant rung on a ladder that climbs toward horrors this section hasn't even named yet, and they're already enough to erase an unprepared world. Picture the garrison you'll never hear of. No shields raised, no evacuation planned, its perimeter breached by gas, and its dead recycled by teeth, before the first true bio-titan has even entered the system. That's the arithmetic the Imperium won't teach you plainly. The bottom of the Tyranid hierarchy is already an extinction event. Everything above it, acolyte, only gets worse. Level 2 isn't subtlety. It's arithmetic, written in chitin and blood, a tide so vast that individual death loses all meaning before it even begins. The termagant doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a purpose beyond the half-second before its thorax bursts open under bolter fire, and it doesn't mourn the 1,000 siblings that died screaming beside it in the same heartbeat. Hormogaunts move faster, claws first, throats bared to whatever guns face them, and still they die by the tens of thousands in a single afternoon, and the hive mind doesn't so much as flinch. Why would it? 1 billion gaunts are cheaper than the bolt shells fired to kill them. Feel that for a moment. Feel what it costs a galaxy of empires built on honor and sacrifice to face an enemy that has none, an enemy for whom sacrifice isn't tragedy but bookkeeping, a debit so small it barely registers against the biomass ledger. This is the level where soldiers learn that courage means nothing to a swarm that was never afraid to begin with. Don't mistake the gaunt broods for the true horror of this level, acolyte, because the true horror doesn't charge across open ground where you can see it coming. Ask yourself, acolyte, what walks upright, thinks, waits, and worst of all, breeds? The genestealer does. A single creature of this level can slip into the underlevels of a hive world, into the sump warrens and reclamation tunnels where no adept ever looks twice, and it'll begin something far more patient than any invasion fleet has ever needed to be. This isn't conquest by claw. This is conquest by bloodline, a slow poison poured into a species' own children before that species even knows the cup's been offered to it. You're heard of it, they've been at it. Let me rewrite with contractions restored. Rewrite. You've heard of genestealer cults spoken of in whispers between sanctioned psychers, and rightly so, because what they describe should curdle whatever remains of your certainty. A patriarch arrives, unseen, and it doesn't slaughter. It seduces, infects, and waits 4 generations for its purpose to ripen, each generation of hybrids drifting further from baseline humanity and closer to something with too many teeth, skin the wrong texture, eyes that catch lamplight like an animal's. First-generation hybrids can pass as men and women in the crowd beside you. Third and fourth generation can't, and by then they don't need to. By then, they run the enforcers, sit on the planetary council, whisper the right doctrines into the right pulpit on feast days, and the whole rotten machinery of a hive world turns quietly toward a single hidden purpose: readiness for a fleet that hasn't yet arrived and may not arrive for 100 years. Fix the invasion has already happened decades ago, and nobody sounded a horn because there wasn't one to sound. What if it happened in a maternity ward, on a world that calls itself untouched, in the cry of an infant whose mother never knew the man she loved wasn't entirely a man at all? The Tyranid doesn't always come as thunder and falling void wreckage. Sometimes it comes as patience, as a secret passed silently through blood for 4 generations, until the hive world that thought itself a fortress discovers it's been a nursery the entire time, cultivating its own executioners in its own cradles. That's the second level's true lesson: Acolyte. Numbers can be counted. Numbers can be burned, drowned, purged with promethium until the ash settles. But a bloodline already living inside your own children can't be purged without purging yourselves first, and by the time you understand that, the purge is already too late to matter. This looks like a leftover status message from a different task, not actual script content. There's nothing grimdark or Inquisitor voiced to line edit here. Could you confirm you meant to paste the actual paragraph from the video script? You have climbed past the mindless tide, Acolyte. Now you stand at the threshold where the swarm begins to bay. Think. Breathe here if you dare. The air already tastes of copper and spent promethium, a battlefield that's learned your name. This is level 3, the Warrior Caste, and it's the first rung on this ladder where the hive stops drowning you in numbers and starts hunting you with intent. A Tyranid warrior does not merely charge. It watches. It positions lesser broods like a butcher, arranging cuts of meat, reading the collapse of a firing line the way a confessor reads the last sins of the dying, and it adjusts before your officers have even finished shouting their first counter-order. Where a termagant swarm is instinct given claws, a warrior is instinct given judgment. A battlefield coordinator wearing chitin, relaying the hive mind's will into tactics your Departamento Munitorum manuals never prepared you to counter. Ask yourself, what does it mean that the swarm can now outthink you locally, block by block, trench by trench, while still serving a will older than your Imperium's oldest scripture? It means the safety you felt in your own cleverness was borrowed time, and the loan has come due. Somewhere in the rubble of a command post, in a shadow no las beam has touched in hours, a lictor is already inside your perimeter, and it's been there since before the alarms sounded. It doesn't roar. It doesn't swarm. Patient as something that has never known impatience, it waits, chameleonic flesh drinking the color from the walls around it, pheromone glands weeping an invisible signal that calls the feast toward wherever it chooses to stand. You won't see it take your Vox officer. You'll only find the silence where his voice used to be, and by the time your squad turns to investigate, the lictor has already marked the killing ground and vanished back into it, patient again, letting your own fear herd you into the jaws of what comes next. Can silence hunt you? Here, yes, silence is not the absence of the enemy. It's the enemy's chosen weapon, and it's very, very good at its work. Feel that tremor beneath your boots, faint, rhythmic, wrong, and understand there's no rear area anymore, no reserve trench, no safe kilometer behind the line where a soldier might close his eyes and believe himself spared. The Tyranid doesn't breach your defenses from without, it arrives from beneath. A burrowing horror the length of a bane blade tearing upward through prepared fortifications like a blade through a corpse already cold, disgorging broods into positions your commanders swore were secure. The Morlock is crueler still, because it doesn't linger to fight. It erupts, devours the geometry of your defense in one violent cavitation of flesh and stone, and submerges again, leaving craters and screaming, and the awful understanding that it'll come back, from somewhere else, whenever the Hive wills it. Every rampart you built was a promise. The Tyranid exists to prove that promise was always a lie you told yourselves. This is the tier, Acolyte, where you've got to abandon the comfort of thinking of the Tyranids as weather, as a flood that simply rises until it drowns you. Weather doesn't lie in wait. Weather doesn't choose its moment. From here downward, the swarm still throws bodies at you without mercy, but from here upward, something behind those bodies is deciding. And cunning has entered the battlefield wearing the same claws that used to only know how to charge. Sleep poorly on that thought, if you can sleep at all. You stand in the antechamber of a mind that isn't a mind, Acolyte, and I want you to understand what holds it together, because it isn't discipline and it isn't loyalty. It's a leash. Beneath this tier, a Tyranid organism is meat that's forgotten how to stop eating. Rip the leash away and watch what's left. Something that claws at its own kin over a still warm corpse, that turns on the brood beside it because the hunger inside it has no shape, no direction, nothing but appetite chewing on itself. That's what the lower broods are, always, underneath. Synapse is the only thing standing between that and an army. Here's the corrected paragraph with natural contractions worked in. So, what is synapse, actually? It's a psychic circuit, a living current run through the tissue of a specific caste of organism, and it does one thing: it tells the meat what to want. Not orders barked down a chain of command, nothing so clean, so military, so human. It's closer to a nervous system extended outward through the air itself, a field of intention radiating from a node and soaking into every gaunt and rippling gargoyle within its reach, and where that field touches, the creature stops being an animal and starts being a component. Ask yourself what it costs to be that component. It costs everything you'd call a self. There's no relief in it, no belonging, only function, warm and total, the way a finger doesn't choose to close around a blade. The Hive Tyrant sits atop this structure like a cathedral built from claws, and it's not merely a synapse beacon, it's a general, and a butcher's cruelty made intelligent. Watch it on the field, and you'll see something worse than savagery. Adaptation, mid-battle, mid-campaign, its bio-weaponry reshaped between engagements as the Hive Mind digests the last defeat and spits out something new to answer it. Bone swords lengthen. Venom cannons mutate their payload. There's no armory here, no requisition order, only flesh, rewriting itself between one slaughter and the next, because the thing commanding this war has already tasted your tactics and found the countermeasure growing beneath its own skin. Then there's the Tervigon, and here the horror turns domestic in the worst possible sense. It doesn't carry troops. It manufactures them, directly, continuously, birthing termagants in screaming, wet clusters, even as the battle rages around it, so that a line you believed broken refills itself from a womb that never stops working. Try to imagine what it is to be a factory that feels the recoil of every contraction and keeps producing anyway, because the alternative, the hive mind running short of bodies, isn't a mercy this organism was built to grant you. Through them, the hive mind's will crosses the gap between void and battlefield undiminished, and you should know, acolyte, that it strikes back through the same channel, warp-born force torn loose and hurled at anything still breathing nearby. Ask yourself what stands above even the tyrant's cunning, a colder power, the Zoanthrope, and its greater cousin the Neurothrope, vast brains, suspended in husks, barely capable of locomotion, existing for one purpose, to be a conduit. They do not fight as a soldier fights, acolyte. They fight as a wound fights, opening in the air itself, because something vast and starving has decided to reach through you. Now, kill the node. Sever the synapse creature, however you manage it, and watch the field around it die a second, quieter death, not collapse into retreat, but into panic without a compass, brood siblings scattering, feeding on wounded allies, standing still and screaming at nothing while their claws open and close on air. There's your proof, acolyte, laid bare in the meat. Nothing beneath this tier ever wanted anything. It only ever borrowed a will, and when the borrowing stops, there's no self left standing underneath to take its place. Only hunger, and hunger can't lead itself anywhere. Bio-titans and the living fleet, ferrying spawning pools across the void. Ask yourself, acolyte, what does a Titan Legion answer when the enemy has no engines, no crew compartments, no cogitators to purge with a well-placed melter charge? It answers with silence, because there's nothing left to say. The Hierophant doesn't walk so much as it arrives, a cathedral of muscle and bone plate, hauling itself across the ruins of a hive city, on 4 load-bearing limbs, thick as troop transports, and every step it takes is a verdict already rendered. Void shields don't so much fail against it as become irrelevant, because the thing isn't fighting your war machine, it's digesting your planet's ability to resist, one collapsed bastion at a time. You've seen the cathedrals of the Adeptus Mechanicus, raised in reverence to the Omnissiah. The Hierophant doesn't revere anything. It simply outweighs your theology. Here is the horror underneath the horror, acolyte. Nothing about it was built. Every plate, every biocannon socket, every kilometer of packed muscle fiber was grown, cultivated in the dark of a hive ship's gut, from genetic templates older than your Imperium's founding myths, templates that remember the shape of every enemy weapon that has ever failed to kill them and correct for it in the next batch. Do you understand what that means for you? Your forges take years to lay a Titan's keel and consecrate its machine spirit. The Hive fleet takes biomass and time, and it has more of both than you do. That is not an advantage it earned. That is simply what it is, and you will die not knowing the difference. Here's the rewritten paragraph with natural contractions worked in, And the ships themselves, you want to call them ships, because the word's comforting, because it implies rivets and dry docks, and an Ordo naval registry somewhere with a fleet number attached. Abandon that comfort now. A hive ship's hull isn't plate steel. It's chitin, grown in overlapping laminate sheets, warm to any hand, fool enough to touch it, and it doesn't carry fuel, because it doesn't burn fuel. It feeds, drawing some cold nutrient the classified reports still can't name, from the black between stars, metabolizing the void itself, the way you metabolize bread. Smell it, and you won't smell promethium and ozone like a naval vessel. You'll smell rot, and beneath the rot, something sweeter and far worse, like meat, kept just past the point of trust. It doesn't creak the way corroding metal creaks. It groans like something asleep and dreaming, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what it dreams of. Do not think of the hive ship as merely a weapon platform, though the God Emperor knows it can level a battle barge in a single engagement. Think of it as a womb in transit. Inside its cavernous holds are the spawning pools, vast lightless lakes of amniotic fluid, where the next level 2, the next level 3, the next horror your world hasn't met yet, is already gestating before the invasion fleets even finished cracking your outer defenses. The hive ship carries genetic templates the way an administratum vault carries record slates, except these records rewrite themselves in response to what killed the last generation. Every world it consumes teaches it something. Every fleet you throw against it becomes, however grudgingly, a contribution to the enemy's own archive. You're not just losing battles. You're being studied. The hive mind, briefly wearing a ship-shaped mouth, and when the mouth can't feed, it simply closes. And so ask the last, worst question. Why hasn't any rogue trader, any Ordo Xenos blacksite, any triumphant admiral ever dragged a hive ship intact into dry dock for study? Because it won't permit that indignity. Corner 1, cripple it past the point of flight, and it does the one thing your enemies rarely do. It consumes itself, cannibalizing its own biomass and every secret riding inside it, rather than yield a single template to your hands. There's no surrender in its vocabulary, because there was never a self in there to surrender. There was only the hive mind, briefly wearing a ship-shaped mouth, and when the mouth can no longer feed, it simply closes. And everything below this level, we've got carcasses for. Corpses on slabs, tissue in stasis jars, autopsy logs, written by men who lived long enough to file them. Here, we don't have that. We have inference. We have the shape of an absence. Wait, let me give the full corrected paragraph properly. You stand now before the deepest chamber Imperial biologist savants dare theorize, acolyte, and I want you to understand that the word theorize is doing more work here than it's done anywhere else in this catalogue. Everything below this level, we've got carcasses for. Corpses on slabs, tissue in stasis jars, autopsy logs, written by men who lived long enough to file them. Here, we've got inference. We've got the shape of an absence. The Norn Queen is what Imperial cognition believes must exist, because nothing else explains what a hive fleet does. Consider the horror of it plainly. A fleet arrives, and every organism within it, every claw, every carapace, every wet humming bioweapon, conforms to a template, a pattern stamped out across thousands of separate creatures with the fidelity of a machine, except no machine did it. Something grew them. Something dreamed the shape of the killing thing before the killing thing existed, and did so from inside a living body, in the dark, in the cold beneath a bioship's hull, surrounded by amniotic reek and the low chemical thrum of a womb that never stops working. That's the Norn Queen, as Imperial savants have reconstructed her, not a general, not a mind in the way you understand minds, but a brood-mother engine, a factory of flesh, building soldiers to a specification she doesn't speak and was never taught. And here is the detail that should sit cold in your chest longer than any of the others, Acolyte. She adapts. Feed a Hive fleet bolter shells, and the next wave grows thicker chitin. Burn it with promethium, and the next wave arrives, already breathing something that does not catch flame the way the last one did. Somewhere in the wet dark of that broodmother's body, the memory of your weapon is being read like a wound is read by a body that heals. Not consciously, not with malice you'd recognize as malice, but with the patience of evolution running at the speed of panic. You spend blood and ammunition learning what kills a Tyranid bioform. The Tyranid spends nothing. It only spends time, and it has more of that than you do, and it was never afraid of losing it. Ask yourself, then, because you will ask, everyone who learns this far asks, whether there is something above her. A Norn emperor, savants whisper, some terminal intelligence that does not merely grow the templates but authors them, a single monstrous author, sitting at the root of every Hive fleet's design, like a god no one has met and lived to describe. Does it exist? I will not lie to you with false certainty, because false certainty is a comfort, and comfort has no home in this chamber. No imperial servant has confirmed its existence. None have stood before it and returned with a report you could trust, because the ones who might have seen it did not come back coherent, or did not come back sane, or did not come back at all. The Norn Emperor lives, if it lives, in the same place your worst fears live, unconfirmed, unfalsifiable, and impossible to stop worrying about, precisely because no one can tell you it isn't there. So sit with this, Acolyte, because it is the whole and ugly point of this level. A Hive fleet learns from its dead, faster than your regiments learn from theirs. Every soldier you kill becomes a lesson banked somewhere in that broodmother's flesh, cashed out as an improvement in the next wave sent against you. What does it mean, then, that you have never actually won a engagement against these things? Not truly. What does it mean that every victory you have ever logged in the Departamento Munitorum's ledgers was, from the fleet's perspective, simply tuition? You did not defeat the enemy. You taught it. And somewhere out past the black, gestating in a womb no telescope has mapped, your next lesson is already being written into the meat. Look upon the 7th level, Acolyte. There's no rung above it, no higher rank to climb toward. Only the thing itself, stripped bare, staring back. What waits at the top is not a creature at all. It's a will, distributed across a trillion cells, spread thin across the dark between the stars, like a fungus spread through soil, and every gaunt that's ever died screaming on an Imperial gun line was never anything more than one nerve ending in a nervous system too vast for your mind to hold. The Hive Mind doesn't command its swarms the way a general commands troops. It thinks them. Every organism, from the smallest wind-borne spore to the Norn Queen coiled in a hive ship's black heart, is a single synapse firing inside a thought that spans galactic arms. And you, acolyte, aren't fighting an army. You're fighting a single idea that's learned to bleed. How do you strike at a mind that has no head? You don't. This is the first devastating truth the Ordo Xenos learned and buried, acolyte, because it offered you no comfort at all. Ask yourself, what does the Hive Mind sound like before its ships even arrive? Nothing. Not a sound, but a silence, a pressure, a wrongness that presses in on the skull like deep water. The shadow in the warp isn't weather, acolyte. It isn't some side effect you can shrug off. It's the psychic breath of something enormous, exhaling across real space, and where it falls, the Astronomicon dims to a rumor, astropaths choke on visions that won't resolve into words, and navigators go blind at the very organ that makes them navigators, clawing at their third eye as if they could dig the darkness out with their fingernails. Choirs of psychers curl into fetal shapes and drool blood onto cold deck plating. Warp travel becomes a gamble made with a loaded weapon pointed inward. So ask yourself what it costs an Imperium built on faster-than-light communication and psychic guidance to lose both, all at once, days before the fleet's even visible on a single auspex. It costs everything, acolyte. It costs coordination, warning, retreat. The shadow doesn't merely precede the invasion, it is the invasion, softening a sector's mind before a single claw touches its soil. So what does it want? Here, the Ordo Xenos stops pretending to certainty, because certainty's a luxury this enemy has never granted anyone. Some hold that the Hive Mind's hunger is the whole of its purpose, that biomass isn't fuel toward some further design, but the design entire, an appetite chasing itself across the void forever, consuming, because consuming is what it is. Others argue for something colder and more patient, that each world stripped and reseeded is a controlled experiment, that new bioforms adapted mid-campaign to counter Imperial tactics are proof of a directed, thinking evolution, refining itself generation by generation, war by war. And a third, quieter theory, frightens the Inquisition more than either, that the Hive Mind isn't hunting at all, but running. That somewhere beyond the galaxy's edge, in the black gulf between spiral arms, something worse drove it here, and every world it devours is a shelter it's building in flight from a predator none of us have ever glimpsed. Understand this plainly, none of these are confirmed. They're competing theories offered by minds that study wreckage and corpses and never once catch the thing itself sitting still long enough to be questioned. The Imperium doesn't know. It may never know. Not knowing is the level itself, acolyte. You've climbed to the final rung, and there's nothing beyond it but an incomprehensible, hungry silence staring back at you. Here you are, acolyte. Watch closely. What follows isn't an order your training would recognize. Somewhere beyond the veil of real space, the Hive Mind doesn't conceive a plan. It conceives an appetite, the way your own body dreams up hunger without deliberation. That appetite's already pressed into the flesh of a Norn queen before the fleet ever burns toward a target star. She doesn't receive a briefing. She is the briefing, her ganglia coiled with preloaded imperatives, her broadstock cooking inside, her long before the first spore pod cracks atmosphere. By the time her gets spill onto your world, The orders have already been metabolized into meat. The corrected paragraph, with contractions restored, then the synapse creatures take up the thread, the zoanthropes, the tyrant guards, the warriors standing tall amid the press, each one a living relay, each one broadcasting cohesion into the void around it, like a heart broadcasts blood. Feel that for a moment. Not a radio signal, not an order sung down a vox channel, but a presence, psychic and continuous, that lesser broods drink from, simply by standing near it. Termagants swarm. Hormagaunts leap. Warrior forms coordinate their killing strokes with a unity your own regiments spend a lifetime drilling toward and never quite reach. And beneath it all, after the guns fall silent and the corpses cool, the Ripper swarms descend to strip the field to bone and gristle, because nothing here's waste, acolyte, nothing's ever wasted. Even your own dead become the next appetite. Now, ask yourself the only question that matters on that battlefield. What happens when you kill the synapse creature? You already suspect the answer, and it's worse than you suspect. The broods around it don't falter. They unravel. Termagants that were a coordinated wall of chitin and gunfire become, in the space of a heartbeat, a scattering of animal terror, biting at each other, fleeing in directions that serve no strategy, because there's no strategy left to serve. Your commanders drill for exactly this collapse. Void Lance batteries and Long Las teams exist to hunt synapse creatures specifically, because the Departamento Munitorums learned, in 10,000 years of dying to learn it, that severing one node buys you 30 seconds of a swarm reduced to meat and reflex. 30 seconds is a gift bought in blood. Take it. Set this beside the Imperium's own machinery of command, and the horror sharpens rather than fades. Your officers issue orders that travel through voxcasters, through chains of authority stamped in wax and law, through men who may hesitate, may misunderstand, who simply aren't always close enough to the line to matter in time. Kill an Imperial captain, and the sergeant beneath him steps forward, shaken but functional, because the chain was built with redundancy in mind. The Tyranids have no such redundancy, because they were never a chain to begin with. No node commands. No node obeys. There's no rank, no officer, no throat to choke that holds the whole edifice together. There's only a nervous system extended across kilometers of Xenos flesh, and you've simply, for one merciful moment, severed a nerve. Come closer, acolyte, and let the smoke of 100 burning hive ships fill your lungs before I speak of what came first. You've learned the 7 levels as a catechism: Ripper, Warrior, Tyrant, and the rest, recited like a rosary of dead words. Behemoth is where the words grew teeth. It arrived in 745.M41, the way a tumor arrives, silently, then everywhere. A border world first, one you've never heard sung of, because there was no one left to sing. Picture the lowest tier made flesh. Ripper swarms pouring through irrigation ducts and grain silos in numbers that clogged lass weapons with their own dead, a tide that didn't fight so much as digest, obstacle by obstacle, house by house. Do you understand what it costs a defender to burn through ammunition on vermin, while the sky itself is still descending? It costs him the ammunition he'll need for what comes after. That's the cruelty coiled inside the lowest level. It's never merely the lowest. It's the toll paid before the real reckoning begins. Then came the mid-tier horror, acolyte, warriors and gaunts advancing in synapse-bound lattices, their courage not their own but borrowed, wired into a nervous system vaster than the world it devoured. Sever the synapse creature. For one shuddering heartbeat, the swarm flinches, animal stupid, prey scared. Then another node steps into the gap, and the horror reasserts itself, seamless, patient, already hungry again. You know what its garrisons learned. In blood, kill the mind, and the body screams. But the Hive Mind has more minds than you have bullets. And when that border world had given everything it had to give, Behemoth turned its slow, unblinking hunger toward Macragge, toward Ultramar itself, toward the world that believed the Codex Astartes was scripture written for every war. Ask yourself what it means when the finest doctrine in the Imperium meets an enemy that doesn't read doctrine, doesn't fear flanking maneuvers, doesn't know what a feint is, because it has no ego to deceive. The Codex assumes an enemy with morale to break. Behemoth had none, not in the Ripper swarms too mindless to know fear, not in the warrior broods too synapse-drowned to disobey, not even in the Hive Tyrants that led the final assaults, towering engines of muscle and boneblade, whose only true vulnerability was the psychic thread tethering them to the fleet's overmind. Marneus Calgar and his chapter didn't defeat the Tyranids by outfighting them. They defeated them by understanding them, by learning, in real time, on their own dying world, that a hive fleet isn't an army, but a single creature wearing a billion faces, and that you kill a creature by finding its throat, not by trading blows with its skin. Acolyte, Macragge's lesson was not written in ink but in flesh, hundreds of ultramarines dead, and beneath them, uncounted mortal defenders ground into the soil that bore their bones. You did not earn the 7 levels to fill some scholar's shelf. Recite them, acolyte, and understand. They are the only reason Macragge stands a shrine world today, rather than a smear of grey biomass, drifting silent between the stars, waiting, as it always waits, to devour you too. Consider, Leviathan, acolyte, and understand, when the Administratum's cartographers first tried to chart its bow wave of destruction, their instruments simply failed to hold the shape of it. Not one system, acolyte. Not one front. Dozens, burning simultaneously, a segmentum-spanning wound opened in a single coordinated breath, while you must recall that Hive Fleets Kraken and Behemoth, before it now read, in hindsight, as mere probing fingers. Leviathan, acolyte, was the fist. Smell the difference in scale, acolyte, and do not flinch from it. Where Behemoth left ash and silence on a handful of dying worlds, Leviathan left an entire arm of the galaxy stinking of digestive acid and spore rot, world after world reduced to the same grey biological paste, the same wet clicking hush that settles after a planet's ecosystem has been unmade and eaten. Name them with me: Osseous Prime, Baal's ruin, half devoured before the blood angels clawed anything back. You will find no pattern of mercy in any of them. Each a separate campaign fought under a separate sky, and yet each one, mark this well, answering to the same distant, patient hunger. Feel the floor tilt beneath you now, acolyte, because Leviathan did not merely conquer, it learned, and it learned faster than any enemy you have catalogued. Ice worlds gave it bioforms sheathed for cold. Hive cities gave it swarms adapted to grind through void shielding and reinforced ceramite. Toxic, acid-choked moons birthed creatures that shrugged off chemistries meant to kill anything born of flesh. This is the Norn Queen theory, made monstrous and undeniable, and you must hold it in your mind whole. Somewhere in that biomass, a will was watching every defeat you dealt it, every weapon you fired, every terrain you bled on, and answering with new meat, built precisely for the problem you presented. Ask yourself what kind of intelligence redesigns its own children mid-invasion, across a dozen worlds, without a single Vox transmission passing between them. Then sit with the answer, Acolyte, because there isn't a comfortable one. It does not need to speak to you. It only needs to feel the swarm die in one place to correct the swarm everywhere else. Now weigh that against what met it, Acolyte. Chapters answered the call in isolated packets. Ultramarines here, Blood Angels there, a company of space wolves, flung into a system with barely a briefing before contact. Guard regiments dug in world by world, each convinced its own siege was the war, each fighting with the doctrine and firepower of a single front rather than a galaxy under simultaneous assault. Honor demanded they hold their line. It didn't demand, and couldn't provide, the thing they actually needed, a single mind, coordinating the defense, the way one mind was coordinating the attack. You've seen a wounded man fight off a swarm of insects. That's humanity against Leviathan, swatting at whichever bite stings worst, while something underneath the swarm calculates the whole assault as one problem with one solution. That asymmetry is the horror the Inquisition doesn't print in its official reports. Not that the Imperium lost worlds, it always loses worlds, but that it lost them, Acolyte, to an intelligence that understood the war better than the humans defending it did. Leviathan is not unique, Acolyte. Sit with that colder truth before you look away. It's not the only fleet the galaxy has produced, nor is it likely to be the last. It's one expression, one arm, one hungry fragment of a level 7 mind that may span the whole of the swarm, every splinter fleet you've ever named, and every one still unnamed, still drifting somewhere beyond the light of your imperial astropaths. Leviathan taught you what one bite feels like. It never once showed you the size of the mouth. Ask yourself, Acolyte, what does it feel like to go blind while still able to see? That's the closest a sighted man comes to understanding what a navigator feels when the Great Devourer draws near. Picture the third eye, bred across 10,000 years of careful lineage, the one that lets a mutant stare into the roiling dark of the Imperium and steer a 100,000-ton cathedral through it. Now picture it simply stopping. Not blinded, Acolyte. Muted. As though something vast and patient has pressed a thumb over a candle flame, not to extinguish it, but to remind the flame how small a thing it is. You won't find astropaths faring any better. Their minds, tuned for centuries to scream across light years, in a single psychic shriek, feel the corridor narrowing, then choking, then closing. Some go mad in the silence, others don't, and that's worse, because they can no longer tell their own thoughts from the pressure closing in around them. Ships lose the Astronomican's guidance. Battle fleets go dark to command, and distress calls scream into a void that no longer echoes back. Don't mistake this for weather, Acolyte. It isn't a side effect. It's attention, the felt sensation of being noticed by something that doesn't blink. Where does it come from? Here, the Imperium's savants stop citing doctrine and start whispering theory, and you should hear the difference. Some hold that the hive mind isn't native to this galaxy at all, that it crossed the black gulf between galaxies the way a plague crosses a border, patient across scales of time that make the long war look like a single afternoon. Others go further, and further is always worse, that the Tyranids aren't migrating toward anything, but away, fleeing some older hunger out past the galaxy's rim, some presence so total that an entire species spanning consciousness chose consumption of 100 billion stars as the safer option. Mark that word. Safer. Sit with what it costs the Imperium to admit that a horror of this magnitude might itself be prey. None of this is confirmed. None of it can be. It's guesswork built on fragments, on dying visions, on the half-sentences of psychers who touched something and were unmade for the touching. The Imperium doesn't know. The Imperium may never know. And an Imperium that can't know is an Imperium that can only catalogue, which brings you to the 7 levels you've spent this entire video learning to name. Consider, Acolyte, what a hierarchy actually is. It's a cage built from words, sized to fit a mind that needs edges to feel safe. Bio forms into castes, castes into tiers, tiers into a tidy pyramid you can hold in your head before you sleep. But the hive mind doesn't experience itself in 7 levels. It doesn't experience itself as a hierarchy at all. It simply is, one continuous appetite wearing a billion different shapes for a billion different purposes, and the number 7 is a kindness the Departamento Analyticus extended to itself, not a truth extended by the thing being studied. You haven't mapped the Great Devourer. You've built a shelf sturdy enough to hold the pieces of it that didn't kill the men sent to look. Ask yourself now, in the quiet after the recording ends, whether the monster you've spent an hour learning to name, its warriors, its guardians, its unseen mind behind a curtain of dead stars, has ever once needed to learn yours. It never crackled, blinked, or waited. She died, not knowing. Return with me now to that listening post you saw, in the opening moment of this recitation, the Vox officer, with her headset crackling, the cogitator banks blinking their patient amber warnings into an empty room. You know now what she didn't. You know that the shape sliding across her auspex, the one her superiors logged as anomalous biomass, low priority, was never a single thing to be catalogued and dismissed. It was level 1, wearing the face of nothing at all, with 6 more levels breathing behind it in the dark, each one waiting its turn to matter. She died, not knowing what killed her. That's the mercy the hive mind extends to its food, ignorance, right up until the swallowing. Acolyte, hear this plainly, because it matters more than any diagram of chitin and claw could. The 7 levels you have just been walked through are not the swarm's architecture. They are yours. They are a ladder built by frightened, brilliant men and women so that a mind shaped by cause and effect could hold something that obeys neither. The hive mind does not organize itself into tiers for your convenience. It does not recognize level 4 as a category any more than an ocean recognizes the word wet. We draw the lines. We count the legs and grade the threat and file the reports, and all the while the thing itself simply is, continuous, undivided, indifferent to the taxonomy we've imposed on its hunger. The chart is a cage we built around smoke. It helps us sleep. It has never once helped a planet survive. And here is the doctrine that no cardinal, no Lord Commander, no ecclesiastical broadcast will ever say aloud on a pict feed, though every serving officer in the Astra Militarum learns it the hard way: no world has ever driven off a Hive fleet. Not truly. Not finally. Every victory logged in the Administratum's endless scrolls is a delay, wearing the mask of triumph, a feeding interrupted, not a feeding refused. And here is the crueler part, the part that should sit cold in your stomach. Every delay is data. Every trench held, every counterattack that surprised the swarm's vanguard, every clever trick of void warfare that scattered a splinter fleet, the hive mind absorbs it, digests it. Somewhere in a system you will never see, on some world already stripped to slag, the next generation adapts to what you taught it about yourselves. You are not fighting a war. You are running a curriculum, and the swarm is the only one graduating. So what is left, when the analysis ends and the truth remains? Only this. The Emperor's light, that dim golden promise burning on the Astronomican's beam, reaches through the void to guide ships and steady minds, but it cannot reach a place where there is no mind left standing to receive it. Light needs an eye. Hope needs a throat to speak it. When the swarm finishes with a world, it does not leave ruins for the light to fall upon. It leaves nothing that qualifies as a place. Just bone-white ground, scoured past memory of green, past memory of rain, past memory of anyone who once called it home, and the hive mind, already gone, already forgetting, because it was never cruel enough to remember you at all.